The baby's cry cut through the dawn silence like a blade through canvas. Jack Morrison stood in his doorway, bare-chested and squinting against the pale light, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A boy couldn't be more than 12, knelt in the dirt beside his porch, clutching something wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. "Don't let them take her away," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. Tears carved clean lines through the grime on his face. "Please, mister. They killed my ma. They killed everyone." Jack's hand instinctively moved to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, but the boy wasn't a threat. He was broken, shattered in a way that made Jack's chest tighten with recognition. The boy held out the bundle, and Jack saw tiny fingers poking through the fabric. A baby no more than 6 months old, with dark hair matted against her skull. "Who killed them?" Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. He'd been alone on this ranch for 3 years, ever since Sarah died, giving birth to the son they'd never hold. Visitors meant trouble, and trouble meant pain. "Riders," the boy gasped. "They came at night, said we were harboring deserters. Ma tried to hide us in the cellar, but they found us anyway." His eyes were hollow, older than his years. "I grabbed my sister and ran. Been walking 2 days. Jack looked past the boy to the horizon, where dust devils danced in the morning heat. No pursuit visible, but that didn't mean they weren't coming. The reconstruction had left scars across Texas deeper than any plow could cut, and men with badges, or men pretending to have them, still rode hard through territories where law meant whatever the strongest man decided it meant. The baby whimpered, and something inside Jack's chest cracked open. He stepped forward, his bare feet hitting the sun-warmed wood of the porch. "Give her to me." The boy hesitated, clutching his sister tighter. "You won't turn us away." Jack met his eyes. In them he saw the same desperation he'd carried for years, the weight of protecting something precious in a world that devoured the innocent. He knelt down, extending his arms. "Not today." The transfer was gentle, reverent. The baby settled against Jack's chest, her tiny fist curling around his finger with surprising strength. She smelled of milk and fear, and something else, hope, maybe, though Jack hadn't smelled that in a long time. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy. Tommy Brennan. This is May." The boy's shoulders sagged with relief, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the empty horizon. They might come looking. Jack stood slowly, the baby's weight both foreign and familiar against his ribs. Through the thin blanket, he could feel her heartbeat, quick and determined, like a bird's wings. "Then we'd better get ready." But even as he spoke, Jack caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Dust clouds on the eastern ridge, moving too fast to be cattle. Riders, maybe 6 or 7, heading straight for his ranch. Tommy saw them too, and scrambled backward, his face white with terror. "They found us," he breathed. Jack's mind raced as he counted the riders. 7 men, moving with purpose across his land, like they owned it. Behind him, Tommy pressed against the doorframe, trembling. The baby in Jack's arms seemed to sense the danger, her small body going rigid. "Inside," Jack ordered, backing toward the house, but Tommy didn't move. The boy stood frozen, staring at the approaching dust cloud with the look of someone who'd already died once. "They'll kill her," Tommy whispered. "They said babies grow up to be problems." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd heard stories, rumors of militia groups cleaning out settlements, claiming they were rooting out Confederate sympathizers or Mexican bandits. But this was different. This was systematic. This was cruelty wearing the mask of justice. Jack stepped between Tommy and the horizon, the baby's weight grounding him. 3 years ago, he would have handed the children over without question. 3 years ago, he'd still believed that survival meant keeping your head down and your conscience buried. But holding May, feeling her trust in the way she gripped his finger, something harder than survival crystallized in his chest. "Get in the house," he said again, his voice steady now. "Back room. There's a trap door under the bed that leads to the root cellar. You take May down there, and you don't come up no matter what you hear." Tommy's eyes widened. "You're not giving us up." Jack looked down at the baby. She'd stopped crying, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. In her gaze, he saw Sarah, The way she'd looked at him when she told him about the baby they'd lost, the trust she'd placed in him to keep their family safe. He'd failed then. He wouldn't fail now. No, he said simply. I'm not. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. Jack could make out individual voices now, men calling to each other, organizing for what they clearly thought would be easy work. Tommy grabbed Jack's arm. Why? You don't even know us. Jack met the boy's eyes. Because some things matter more than staying alive. He handed May back to Tommy, watching as the boy's thin arms wrapped protectively around his sister. The gesture reminded Jack of every prayer he'd ever whispered, every hope he'd buried with Sarah in the small cemetery behind the house. Listen to me, Jack continued, moving quickly now. If something happens to me, you wait until dark, then you head north. Follow the creek about 5 miles until you reach the old mission. Father Miguel will take you in, no questions asked. What about you? Jack was already reaching for his gun belt, the familiar weight of the Colt settling against his hip. Through the window, he could see the riders clearly now, hard men with harder faces, the kind who'd learned to kill before they'd learned to shave. I'll be fine. The lie came easily, practiced from years of telling Sarah everything would work out, even when the crops failed, and the creditors came calling. Now get down there. Tommy hesitated, May still clutching Jack's finger through the blanket. For a moment, the three of them formed a strange family, broken pieces fitting together in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then the riders crested the hill, and Jack saw the leader's face clearly. He recognized the man immediately, Captain Hayes, late of the Confederate Army, now running his own brand of frontier justice with a badge that may or may not have been legal. Tommy disappeared into the back room with May, and Jack heard the trap door close just as the riders surrounded his house. Captain Hayes sat his horse like a man who'd never met an obstacle he couldn't shoot through. His uniform was a patchwork of Confederate gray and Union blue, held together with brass buttons that caught the morning light like coins on a dead man's eyes. The 6 men flanking him looked cut from similar cloth, mercenaries who'd traded their souls for steady pay and the right to call themselves lawmen. Morning, Morrison. Hayes' voice carried the cultivated drawl of educated cruelty. Heard you might have visitors. Jack stepped onto his porch, hands loose at his sides. The Colt felt heavier than usual, like it was already weighted with the blood it might spill. Can't say I have, Captain. Just me and the chickens, same as always. Hayes smiled, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco and worse habits. That's funny, because we tracked 2 sets of footprints right to your door, small ones, child-sized you might say. The baby's cry from beneath the house was barely audible, muffled by earth and wood, but Hayes's head tilted like a wolf catching scent. His smile widened. There it is, he said softly, the sound of unfinished business. Jack felt sweat gather between his shoulder blades, despite the morning chill. Don't know what you're talking about. Course you don't. Hayes dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs ringing against the hard pan. See, we had ourselves a situation down in Millerville. Bunch of squatters harboring deserters, claiming they didn't know any better, had to make an example. The casual admission hit Jack like a fist. These weren't lawmen cleaning up criminal elements. They were killers who'd found a way to make murder profitable. Millerville's 20 miles south, Jack said carefully. Whatever happened, there's got nothing to do with me. Everything's got something to do with you when it happens on your land. Hayes began walking toward the porch, his men spreading out in a practiced formation that cut off all escape routes. Now we know those Brennan kids made it out. Boy and a baby girl. We tracked them here, Morrison. Question is, where are they now? Jack's hand drifted toward his gun, but 6 rifles swung his direction before he could blink. Hayes laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Easy there, hero. We're not unreasonable men. You hand over the children, and we'll make sure you don't suffer for harboring fugitives. Hell, we might even deputize you. Always need good men who understand the value of cooperation. May's cry came again, stronger this time, and Jack saw Hayes's eyes light up with predatory satisfaction. The captain gestured toward the house with a gloved hand. Jenkins, Carter, check the house, look for trap doors, hidey holes, anything clever. Kids are like mice, they squeeze into the damnedest places. Two of the riders dismounted, heading for Jack's front door. This was it. In moments they'd find the cellar, find Tommy and May, and Jack would have to live with the sound of children dying, because he wasn't fast enough or smart enough or brave enough to save them. But as Jenkins reached for the door handle, something unexpected happened. May's cries stopped. Not gradually, not muffled, they simply ended, as if someone had placed a gentle hand over her mouth. Tommy, Jack realized. The boy was keeping his sister quiet, trusting Jack to handle what came next. That trust hit harder than fear. It settled in Jack's chest like a stone, heavy and unshakable. He thought of Sarah, of the promise he'd made at her grave to be the man she'd believed him to be. He thought of May's tiny fingers wrapped around his, choosing to hold on instead of letting go. Hayes stepped onto the porch, close enough that Jack could smell whiskey on his breath. Last chance, Morrison. Where are they? Jack met his eyes. Go to hell. Hayes nodded slowly, as if Jack had confirmed something he'd already known. Jenkins, he called softly, burn it. Buzz. The match flared in Jenkins' hand like a fallen star, and for a heartbeat, the world balanced on the edge of flame. But before he could touch it to the kindling he'd pulled from his saddlebag, Tommy Brennan walked out the front door. The boy moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd already made peace with dying. May was wrapped against his chest in the blood-stained blanket, her dark eyes wide but no longer crying. She seemed to understand, in the way babies sometimes do, that silence meant survival. Don't burn the house, Tommy said quietly. We'll come. No. Jack started forward, but Hayes' pistol appeared in his hand faster than thought. Easy, Morrison. Boy's making sense. Hayes holstered his weapon and stepped toward Tommy with the careful movements of a man approaching a spooked horse. That's real smart, son. Shows you understand how the world works. Tommy's chin lifted, and Jack saw something in the boy's face that reminded him of soldiers he'd known, men who'd faced impossible odds with nothing but stubborn courage holding them together. I understand plenty. Course you do. Hayes reached for May, but Tommy stepped back. I want to say goodbye first. Tommy's voice cracked, but he held Hayes' gaze. She's all I got left of my family. Something flickered across Hayes's face, not quite human, but close enough to pass for it in the right light. Minute, he said curtly. Then we finish this. Tommy turned toward Jack, and in that moment, the space between them collapsed into something deeper than words. Jack saw himself at 12, holding his dying father's hand while fever took the last good man he'd ever known. He saw Sarah, teaching him that love meant choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. He saw every crossroads where he'd chosen safety over courage, and tasted the bitter arithmetic of a life spent calculating the cost of caring. Take her, Tommy whispered, holding May out to Jack. Just for a second, Jack's arms opened without conscious thought. May settled against his chest like she belonged there, her small warmth spreading through his ribs to places that had been cold for years. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold entire lifetimes, past and future compressed into a single moment of absolute trust. Her first word was bird. Tommy said softly, loud enough for Jack to hear but not the others. May used to sing to her about birds flying free. Said one day May would understand what that meant. Jack felt something break open in his chest, not the sharp crack of breaking, but the slow bloom of ice melting in spring. He looked down at May, at the way her tiny fingers reached toward his face with complete faith that he would keep her safe. She will, Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. I promise. Tommy nodded, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. He leaned forward and kissed his sister's forehead, a gesture so tender it made Jack's throat close tight. Love you, May Bird, Tommy breathed. Always will. Hayes cleared his throat impatiently. Time's up, boy. Hand her over. But Tommy didn't step away from Jack. Instead he looked up at him, with eyes that held no fear, only a strange kind of peace. Mr. Morrison, he said quietly, thank you for trying. Jack started to answer, but Hayes was already reaching for May, and Jack's body moved before his mind could catch up. He spun away from Hayes' grasping hands, sheltering May against his chest as his other hand found the butt of his Colt. "Like hell," he growled. The world exploded into motion. Hayes' men brought their rifles up, but Jack was already diving behind the water trough. May clutched tight against him. Tommy scrambled after them, and Jack heard the boy's sharp intake of breath as the first bullets started flying. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it stretched like hours in Jack's memory. He came up from behind the trough with his Colt speaking thunder, putting 2 rounds center mass into Jenkins before the man could work his rifle bolt. Hayes dove for cover behind his horse, shouting orders that were lost in the chaos of gunfire and screaming animals. Jack felt a bullet tug at his shirt, another one splinter the wood inches from May's head, but the baby didn't cry. She pressed herself against his chest like she understood that silence was survival, her tiny fist tangled in his shirt with surprising strength. Tommy crouched beside them, eyes wide but steady. "What do we do?" Jack counted shots, calculated angles. 4 men down, Hayes and 1 other still shooting. Not good odds, but better than they'd been moments before. "We finish it." He waited for a lull in the gunfire, then rose and put a bullet through Hayes's horse. The animal screamed and went down, pinning the captain's leg beneath its thrashing body. Hayes's remaining man, a young kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, threw down his rifle and raised his hands. "Don't shoot," the kid called. "I'm done. We're done." Jack kept his gun trained on Hayes, who was struggling to free himself from beneath his dying horse. Blood soaked the captain's trouser leg, and his face had gone pale with shock and pain. "Should kill you," Jack said quietly, "for what you did in Millerville, for what you were going to do here." Hayes spat blood into the dirt. "Go ahead, Morrison. Make yourself a murderer like me." Jack stood there for a long moment, May warm against his chest, feeling the weight of choice settle around him like dust after an explosion. He could pull the trigger. Hayes deserved it. The world might even be better for it. But May's tiny hand pressed against his heart, and he remembered Sarah's voice. "Being good isn't about what people deserve. It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching." "No," Jack said finally, "I won't." He lowered his gun and looked at the surviving rider. "Get him on a horse and get out. Don't come back." The young man nodded frantically, already moving toward Hayes. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As they rode away, Hayes slumped over his saddle, the kid leading both horses. Jack sank onto his porch steps with May still cradled against his chest. Tommy sat beside him, neither of them speaking as the dust settled, and the morning resumed its quiet rhythm. "What happens now?" Tommy asked finally. Jack looked down at May, who had fallen asleep with her cheek pressed to his heart. Her breathing was deep and steady, the sleep of someone who felt completely safe. "Now we build something better." He thought of the empty rooms in his house, the silence that had lived there since Sarah died. He thought of Tommy's thin shoulders and the way May's fingers curled around his own. He thought of second chances, and the strange arithmetic of love, how it multiplied instead of dividing, how it made you stronger instead of weaker. "You really mean that?" Tommy's voice was small, careful. "About us staying?" "Yeah," Jack said, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything. "I do." Years later, when May took her first steps across the sun-warmed boards of the porch, Jack would remember this moment, the weight of her sleeping in his arms, the trust in Tommy's eyes, the way love had arrived like dawn after the longest night. He would remember choosing courage over safety, connection over solitude, and how that choice had saved them all. By then the ranch would echo with laughter and children's voices. May would indeed understand what it meant to fly free, just as her mother had promised. And Jack Morrison, who had once believed himself too broken to love anyone, would know the particular joy of a man who had chosen to build rather than break, to shelter rather than abandon, to become the father his heart had always known how to be. The last frame would be simple, 3 figures silhouetted against the Texas sunset, walking toward a house that finally sounded like home.